My son spat the word worthless across the aisle, and it struck me like a slap. The room froze. Lilies. Camera flashes. Aunt Mabel's gasp. The word hanging heavier than the church roof. I stood at the back in my old suit, hands clenched, the envelope burning in my pocket. I had come to bless him, to sit where fathers sit, but he turned his back and smiled at a stranger. I moved forward anyway. The priest, midway through a blessing, reached for paper during the silence. The envelope in his hand was mine. It opened the night like a merciless sun. I will not hide the question the whole congregation asked without shifting their gaze to me. What is in that envelope? That question is a little beast that paced the tiles and climbed the hymnals. I will tell you from the place where I felt every stitch of shame, every sting of betrayal, and the small, cold decisions that started to harden inside me. They will ask, afterwards, what I did next. For now, I want you to feel the first burn of the ember, so you understand why the rest of the fire was inevitable. I remember the suit I chose. Not the flashy one I used to wear when my shoulders still claimed attention, but the charcoal with a faint blue thread that caught the light like an old promise. It smelled of cedar. My son once teased me that I smelled like a library. Tonight that scent was a rope tying me to everything I had been. A teacher, a husband, a union man who knew the rhythm of his town. The church smelled of lilies and lemon oil. My hands were dry, the envelope crinkled like a guilty paper between my fingers. Humiliation was immediate and public. He said the word, and it wasn't an accident. His tone was a blade disguised as a casual remark. I watched the bride squeeze his arm and the pastor blink, trying to buy time for the ceremonial niceties. People around me shuffled their feet, looked down at programs, pretended to cough. My daughter-in-law's smile never faltered. She had practiced that smile for years. I had not expected it from my son. I had not expected him to turn a room of witnesses into my jury. I had written the envelope on the morning of the wedding. I tucked a single page into it. One page I wrote with a trembling hand and steady mind. I wrote to him as if I were speaking across a river. I wrote because there were things you could not say in a public speech where all eyes were on you and your failures. I had rehearsed a blessing, but rehearsals are delicate things. The world does not always give you the lines you need. So I wrote the real lines instead. The letter was not an explosion. There is a style to private justice. Neat, measured, and final. I signed it with my full name and a date, an anchor for anyone who might study the record later. I left it to be opened at the altar because my uncle used to say that altars are for truth, sometimes for forgiveness, sometimes for the truth that forces forgiveness to be honest. That line in my chest that kept me from running out of the church tightened into resolve. If the envelope had to be opened, then let it be opened where witnesses could see that I had not crawled away into secrecy. The priest's hands trembled slightly when he slipped the flap. His fingernail caught the paper like a hesitation. The room leaned forward as if the whole building wanted to overhear. The sound the paper made, thin, decisive, rang like a bell. There was a pause so long you could map people's lives inside it. A child thinking of candy, an old woman counting breaths, my son thinking he had finished me. The priest cleared his throat and began to read. "My son," he read, and his voice steadied. "There are seasons when a father cannot stand by and watch a son bury himself in lies." The congregation shifted. A mother 2 rows ahead whispered, "Oh my." My son went pale, and I tasted metal in my mouth. The priest kept going. He read the facts, curtailed with the kind of sorrow a man owes his own blood. The late-night calls ignored, the signatures forged on papers I had kept safe for 30 years, the promises made in bars and broken with ledger lines. He read about money taken from an account I thought invisible, loans denied, a small house almost lost. He read about the patient kindness I had given and the contempt it had returned. It was not the richest thing I've had to suffer. I had been called worse in the factories in my youth, when foremen used to measure men by how long they stayed. This was different. It was a private debt made public, a betrayal braided into a wedding vow. I watched my son's jaw work, the way a man tries to grind a word down until it disappears. I watched my daughter-in-law's face, stone and pearl, and realized that she had decided the story long before I stepped into the pews. Her eyes were not seeing me. They were seeing the envelope and what it might implicate, a theft of social standing, the inconvenient truth at the center of her new family. I felt, somewhere down where men carry decades, the old outrage. Not the flamboyant rage of a younger man, but a cold calculation. What does ruin look like when you dress it in civility? I had loved him in the small, stubborn ways a father does, by fixing his wobbly bike instead of asking why it was broken, by teaching him how to fix a carburetor instead of asking whether he wanted to learn. I had been present in the arithmetic of life, school payments, Sunday dinners, the nights when bills ate the quiet, and now it turned out that my presence had been a ledger he chose to exploit. I have always been a man of small ceremonies. Coffee at dawn, folding shirts on Sundays, placing my father's old watch on the dresser. I think that is why I chose the altar. There is theater in ritual. The priest read the one sentence that mattered most for the room. I refused to be made a ghost at my son's wedding. For a moment my voice was only in my skull. Later I learned I had said nothing aloud then, but my hands remembered the rhythm of speech. I have a memory of words like tools, and I kept one in my pocket. At this point in the service someone sobbed, a sharp sound, and the organist faltered. My daughter, God bless her, stood as if to come to me but was hemmed in by relatives. My brother, who had flown in from the next state, looked at me with his mouth tight and said nothing. His silence was an indictment or a comfort. I could never decide which. My son tried to speak, stammering apologies that did not reach the altar. He said, "It's not what you think," which is a polite little murder of truth, wrapped in calm. If you have ever been lied about by someone you loved, you know how the phrase arranges itself like a trapdoor. I will not pretend I did not want to storm the aisle. There is a part of me, still trained by a lifetime of asking for fairness on factory floors and in union halls, that wanted spectacle, a public accounting. But vanity and dignity are cousins, and I chose dignity. I stepped forward slowly, and the room smelled strong then of lemon wax and the faint smoke of incense that had been used earlier. The priest folded the letter, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, and looked down at me like a man who had to decide whether to absolve a sin or reveal a betrayal. "Do you want to say something?" he asked, the tone of a man who knows how to shepherd a wound. My mouth was dry, my voice was a rope that had to be hauled. I thought about the envelope, about the small, precise facts written there, and about the life I had been given that demanded someone stand up and name the night for what it was. I thought about my son's bride, and whether she knew the ledger she had married into. I thought of my grandchildren, if there would be any, and whether they would grow up learning that family can sometimes mistake greed for providence. I started to speak. The words were not theatrical. They were not intended to fell anyone like a hammer. They were the voice of a man who had kept too many quiet stitches and decided to show the seam. "I did not come tonight to make a scene," I said, my voice surprise rough, "but I will not be erased." There was a hush like a held breath. My son clenched his hands so hard I could see the whiteness around his knuckles. Someone behind me muttered a prayer. What I say next will either become the hinge of this story or the footnote. I will keep it precise because the rest of the envelope is a map. I told them, in plain sentences, what had happened and what I had found. I told them that to forgive someone is a strength, but to ignore theft is a kindness that betrays the rest of the family. I did not cry. Tears have their own currency, and I had spent some of mine earlier in the week over old photographs. I spoke with the tone a teacher has, the voice that says, "Here is the lesson, and I will not lie about it." As I finished, the priest folded his hands and said, solemnly, "We will discuss this outside." The phrase felt like a small reprieve and a promise of future reckoning. The bride gathered her veil like a shield. My son looked at me with something like hatred and something like panic braided together. The congregation began to move, people shuffling into the foyer or outside where the evening air could take their gossip. Cameras still glinted in pockets. My body buzzed with the electricity of being seen. I left the sanctuary walking slow. each step a deliberate choreography so that nothing broke into ruin. In the foyer, an aunt touched my arm and whispered, "Bless you." A cousin made an apologetic smile and hurried past. Outside Varn, the air was cool, the kind of clear cold that smells of coming rain. I slid my hand into my pocket and felt the envelope there, empty now of its secret but heavy with consequence. The priest stood under the portico, the envelope in his hands like a small verdict. He looked up at me, and for the first time his eyes held something that was not only compassion, but a curious calculation. He asked me quietly, "Is there more I should know?" I looked at him, at his collar, at the way his fingers fumbled the paper, and for a fleeting heartbeat I saw the scale of what could come: justice, scandal, forgiveness, a life rearranged. I could walk away, tuck my shame under a coat and let the night swallow it. Or I could press the paper into the light and let the town decide. The envelope in his hand felt both like a key and a match. And then, before I could answer, the phone in my pocket vibrated with a name I had not expected to see. The name glowing on my phone screen was Marjorie, my late wife's best friend, a woman who had always known more about my family than I wished her to. I had not spoken to her in months, maybe years. Not since the funeral when she whispered that grief was easier than betrayal. I felt the vibration in my palm like a second heartbeat. The priest's eyes followed the phone as if it were part of the testimony. I silenced it with my thumb, but the name was burned into me. The timing was no accident. Someone wanted me to know I was not finished being tested. The crowd spilled out of the church, half avoiding me, half circling like they wanted to catch the scent of scandal. My son, red-faced and trembling, rushed the bride into a car. I watched her veil flutter like a white flag, but I knew it was no surrender. She was a strategist, her silence a weapon sharper than any insult. He muttered to her as they climbed in, but the door slammed before I could catch a word. The engine roared, gravel spit from the tires, and just like that they vanished into the night of their own making. I stood under the portico, the priest's hand still holding the envelope, and I asked myself a question that would not stop echoing. Was I wrong to expose him? Fathers are supposed to cover their sons with pride, to protect them from public shame. But protection turns into enablement if you mistake greed for a stumble. My son had not stumbled. He had dug, with careful hands, into the soil of my trust until the roots showed. If a man does that and you cover it, then you bury yourself along with him. The priest cleared his throat. "This will not stay here," he said. "People will talk. They will demand explanations. Are you prepared for that?" I looked him straight in the eye, the way I used to look at foremen when they tried to cut corners on wages. "They already think I am worthless," I said. "What else can they take from me now?" But deep inside I knew. They could take my dignity, and I could not allow it. The phone buzzed again. I stepped into the cold air, pressed it to my ear, and Marjorie's voice, thin but sharp, sliced through the evening. "You didn't think he forged those papers alone, did you?" I froze. My throat tightened as though the night air had turned into smoke. "What do you mean?" I asked. She sighed, the sound of someone who had been waiting years for me to open the right door. "Check the signature on your old mortgage. Not the last one, the one before. It isn't his handwriting. It's hers. Hers. The bride. She was in it long before the ring went on her finger." The words landed harder than my son's insult. I pressed my back against the stone wall of the church, the chill seeping into me. The priest hovered nearby, uncertain whether to leave me to my privacy or witness the unraveling of a family. Marjorie kept talking. "You've been watching the wrong person. Your son. He's weak, yes, but she's clever, ruthless. The kind who would rather build her house with stolen bricks than earn her own." My hand shook around the phone. For a moment the world narrowed to that voice and the thud of blood in my ears. All these years I thought my son's choices were his alone, the recklessness of a man chasing pride with empty pockets. But if Marjorie was right, then my son was not just reckless, He was recruited, groomed. The priest touched my elbow. "Do you need to sit?" I waved him off. "No, I need to listen." Marjorie's voice lowered, urgent. "Go home. Look in your desk drawer, the bottom one. You'll find something he forgot to destroy." The line went dead before I could ask more. I slipped the phone into my pocket, heart hammering. The priest studied me with that cautious gaze priests have, halfway between sympathy and judgment. "Are you all right?" he asked. I smiled without humor. I was just called worthless in front of God and family. Tonight I found out I may have been robbed twice. You tell me. He didn't answer. His silence was heavy, respectful, but also fearful. Men of the cloth understand that sometimes the truth is not holy but dangerous. I walked away from the church slowly, the cool night wrapping me. The town was quiet, just a few neon signs glowing above the diner across the street, the hum of a refrigerator unit from the liquor store. My shoes scuffed the sidewalk, and each step sounded louder than it should have, as though the whole world was measuring my pace. At the corner I paused. My house was 3 blocks away, but those 3 blocks stretched like a mile of questions. My neighbors would already know something had happened. This is the kind of town where whispers travel faster than cars. By the time I turned the key in my front door, they would be making their own versions of my story. The house smelled faintly of dust and the lemon polish I had used on the dining table that morning. I flicked on the light, the warm yellow glow pooling across the room like a safe harbor. For a moment, I almost wished the house would greet me with silence, as if no secrets lingered. But secrets have a way of pressing against the walls until you hear them breathe. I went straight to my study. The bottom drawer of the desk had not been opened in months. My fingers found the handle, hesitated, then pulled. Inside was the mess of old bills, receipts, and notes from years back. The smell of old paper rose, sharp and musty. And there, tucked between 2 folded bank statements, was an envelope. Not mine this time, a different one. My breath caught. I lifted it out. The paper brittle and yellowed at the edges. Across the front, in a handwriting I did not recognize, was my name. I opened it with careful hands. Inside was a contract, notarized, bearing both my son's and the bride's signatures. It was dated almost 2 years ago, long before the engagement was even announced. The contract sold a piece of land, my land, the small plot I had inherited from my father, where I had once planted tomatoes with my son when he was 10. It had been transferred under my name, but the signature was a forgery. I felt the floor tilt. The realization came like a tide. They had been planning this marriage not as a union of love but as a business merger, a way to legitimize theft, and they had used my own blood to stab me. I sat in the chair, the paper trembling in my grip. My father's watch ticked faintly on the dresser, each second a hammer. I remembered his voice. "Never let anyone call you less than you are. Your dignity is the only land no one can steal." Now they had stolen even that. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years I prayed, not for peace, but for clarity. What was the path ahead? To confront them in public, to drag them into court, to burn the whole facade down, or to wait, to watch, to strike at the moment when their arrogance left them exposed. When I opened my eyes, the paper was still there, undeniable. I folded it carefully, slipped it into a folder, and locked it away in a metal box under my bed. If they wanted to strip me, they would have to strip me in the light of day. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hand was shaking so much that drops spilled across the counter. I stared at them, tiny shining beads, and felt the rage settle, not the hot rage of youth, but the slow, cold fire of a man who has been humiliated one time too many. I knew now that this was not only about a wedding insult. This was about years of betrayal woven behind my back. And the priest opening my envelope was only the first act. The phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Marjorie. It was an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A man's voice, low and rough, said, "You don't know me, but I know what your son did. And if you want proof, meet me tomorrow at noon, by the diner. Come alone." The line went dead. I stared at the dark window, my own reflection looking back at me. An old man with dignity on the edge of being stolen, but not yet defeated. The question wasn't if I would meet him. The question was what I would find waiting at that diner. Morning light slipped into my house like an uninvited guest. I hadn't slept. The envelope with the forged contract weighed on me heavier than the suit I had worn to the wedding. I brewed coffee, its bitter smell filling the kitchen, and stared at the steam rising from the cup as if it might spell answers. Every tick of the clock sounded like a verdict. Noon was coming, and with it, the stranger's promise of proof. I shaved carefully, pressing the razor slow across my skin. My reflection in the mirror looked older than yesterday, but sharper too, as though humiliation had carved away the softness. I chose a navy blazer, pressed slacks, polished shoes. Not because I wanted to impress, but because dignity is armor, and I wasn't about to meet a stranger in rags of despair. When I fastened my father's watch to my wrist, I whispered to myself, "They called you worthless. Prove them wrong." By 11:30, I was walking down Main Street toward the diner. The town was awake, chatter spilling from shop doors, cars nosing along the cracked pavement. I caught eyes on me, neighbors who had already heard fragments of the scandal. Mrs. Doyle, from the corner store, tilted her head as though deciding whether to offer sympathy or suspicion. I gave her a polite nod and kept moving. In a town this size, gossip travels faster than the morning paper. By nightfall, they'd all have their version of why a father was cursed at his son's wedding. The diner's bell jingled as I stepped in. The place smelled of bacon grease, black coffee, and maple syrup. A smell that never changed since the day I used to bring my kids here for pancakes after Sunday church. The booths were full of chatter, truckers, 2 retired teachers, a pair of teenagers staring at their phones. The man I was supposed to meet was easy to spot. He sat in the far corner, a cap pulled low, a denim jacket frayed at the cuffs. His posture was that of someone who carried secrets like bricks. I slid into the booth across from him. He didn't look up immediately, just stirred his coffee with a spoon, the clink of metal sharp in the air. Finally, his eyes met mine. Dark, watchful, with the tired look of a man who'd seen more nights than mornings. "You came," he said, voice low. Most men wouldn't. "I've already been dragged through enough public shame," I replied. "Curiosity's the only thing I have left." He gave a half smile. "Good. Curiosity's dangerous. Makes men see what others want hidden." He reached into his jacket and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "That contract you found, that's just one. There are more. Dozens. Your son and his bride have been selling pieces of your name for years." I unfolded the paper. Another deed. Another forged signature. This one for a bank loan taken out in my name. My stomach tightened. "How did you get this?" I asked. He leaned in, his breath carrying the faint odor of cigarettes. "Let's just say I used to do business with your son. Small favors. Quick cash. But he got greedy. He stopped paying. And worse, he made enemies. People who aren't as forgiving as you. He thinks a wedding ring and a white dress can cover debts. But debts don't stay buried." I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. "Why come to me?" "Because you're the only one who can hurt him in the place it matters." I thought of the bride, her calm smile at the altar, knowing all along she had a knife tucked under her veil. And I thought of myself, an old man sitting in a booth with a stranger, clutching evidence of betrayal that could burn my family to the ground. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally. "Nothing," he said. "Just don't waste what you've been given. Some men rot in silence. Don't be that man." Before I could reply, he slid out of the booth, tossed a few bills on the table for his coffee, and walked out. The bell jingled again. He was gone as if he had never been there at all. I sat there staring at the paper. My hands were trembling, not with weakness, but with the force of knowing I now carried a weapon. The waitress, a woman I had known for 20 years, poured me coffee and whispered, "I heard about the wedding. Don't let them break you." She patted my shoulder and walked off. It was a small kindness, but it steadied me. I walked home slowly, clutching the folder inside my blazer. Each step felt like I was walking toward a line I couldn't uncross. At my door, I paused, sensing something was wrong. The curtains in the living room fluttered though the window was shut. I stepped inside, the air heavy, the silence unnatural. The study door was ajar. My heart raced. I pushed it open and froze. The metal box under my bed where I had locked the first forged contract was gone. The room smelled faintly of perfume, not my late wife's, not Marjorie's, something newer, powdery, sweet, unmistakable. The bride had been here. My chest tightened, rage mixing with a terrible clarity. They weren't just covering their tracks. They were ahead of me, watching, waiting, stripping me piece by piece. On the desk, a note in neat handwriting waited. 4 words. Stay silent for family. My knees almost buckled. I gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles whitened. The insult at the wedding had been public. The theft of my land had been financial. But this was personal war, brought into the heart of my home. I burned the note in the sink, watched the ashes swirl down the drain, and promised myself I would not stay silent. Family or not, betrayal wears no excuse. That night, I sat in the dark. The stranger's documents spread on the table before me. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the watch on my wrist. I thought of my grandchildren yet unborn, of neighbors whispering my name, of my wife's grave up on the hill, and I thought of the word worthless echoing through the church and how I would carve it out of their mouths with truth. But as I gathered the papers to hide them again, headlights swept across my window. A car idled outside, my son's car. I froze, the documents clutched in my hand, and then the front door handle turned. The handle turned once, slow and testing, then again with the impatient rattle of someone who believed the house owed them obedience. I slid the documents beneath a folded newspaper and stepped into the hallway. The door swung open and my son entered without looking at me first, the way a man enters a room he already owns. His hair was still neat from the wedding, but his eyes were raw, pupils pinned tight like he hadn't slept. Behind him came the bride, no veil, just a white blouse with sharp cuffs and a perfume that rode in before her like a flag. A third figure followed, broader, arms like railroad ties under a sport coat. He looked at me and then at my hands, weighing the distance between us. My son spoke without greeting. "Where is it?" I didn't pretend confusion. "Where is what?" "The paper. The one you waved around in front of God." His jaw worked, a grinding motion he'd had since he was 13 and thought strength lived in clenched teeth. The bride's eyes swept the room with practiced efficiency. "We're not here to argue," she said, which is exactly what people say when they plan to take something rather than discuss it. "We're here to make sure your misunderstanding doesn't embarrass the family." "The family," I repeated, and tasted iron. "You mean yours." She smiled, small and patient. "Ours now." Her perfume was powdery and sweet, faintly medicinal, and my mind cataloged it because I wanted to remember every detail of this moment. War deserves a ledger. I lifted a hand, palm open. "No shouting in my house." Then, because dignity needs teeth, I slid my phone from my pocket and tapped the voice memo. The red light glowed the size of a freckle. I set the phone on the end table between us like a coaster. My son's gaze flicked to it. He laughed without humor. "Paranoid now?" "Careful," the bride murmured to him. Then to me, crisp. "You left a letter that implies criminal accusations. That was reckless." "Reckless," I said, "is forging my name on a deed." A muscle jumped in her cheek. "You have a talent for dramatics. It was a clerical error. The title company corrected it." "You used to work at a title company," I said, and watched her eyes miscalculate the distance between memory and danger. Funny how clerical errors know where to find you. The big man took one step forward. "Sign this, sir," he said, and produced a document from his coat. His voice had the careful politeness of someone who had practiced being respectable. "It's a simple affidavit confirming your mental state. It'll help clear up the confusion." I didn't take it. "You want me to declare myself competent," I said. "In a room where you're attempting to intimidate me into signing something sight unseen? You should have rehearsed that better." My son flinched, anger and shame scraping together. "Dad, please. You don't understand how money works now. It's not the old days. We needed leverage. It's all temporary. Everyone does it." "Everyone doesn't use their father like a spare credit card," I said. "Everyone doesn't spit at a man in a church and call him worthless." His eyes glossed with something I wanted to call regret, but recognized as panic. "You made it public. You made it necessary." The bride's voice softened. Sugar poured over razor wire. "We can fix this. If you sign a statement withdrawing your claims, Will what?" I asked. "Give me my land back. Unsay your insult. Put 30 years of trust back in the drawer where you found it." Her gaze sharpened. For a moment, the kindness mask slipped. "You think this is about sentiment," she said. "It's math. The property was underperforming. We flipped it. You can either be part of the solution or become a problem we solve." I saw it clean then. The marriage as a spreadsheet, my son as a tab in her workbook, me as a liability to be zeroed out. I stepped closer, so close that her perfume thinned into something metallic. "You were in my house today," I said. She didn't blink. "I was never here." "Your note tried to teach me ventriloquism." I kept my voice mild. "Stay silent for family." "Family? Reputation? Court of law. I can't go to the sheriff with this. They'd ask where I got it, and I'm not looking to share my sins. But you?" He tapped the papers. "You're clean. You have nothing left to lose but the dignity he already spat on." For a moment the noise of the diner faded, replaced by the pounding of my heart. I thought of my son, the boy I once taught to ride a bike, now tangled in schemes and lies. I don't learn new tricks easily. My son reached for the newspaper and flipped it, hands clumsy. The documents peeked out. Before his fingers closed, I laid my palm over them, gentle but immovable. He looked shocked, as if time had lied to him about the strength left in me. "Don't," I said quietly. "Not one more theft in my home." He recoiled, then recovered with a sneer he had borrowed from men who think cruelty equals adulthood. "You can't win this," he said. "We'll have you declared incompetent. We'll take care of your affairs. We already talked to a lawyer." The big man cleared his throat. He didn't like the direction the script had taken. "Incompetent," I repeated. "Because I can still read my own name and smell your wife's perfume on my desk drawer." The bride changed tactics. "You're tired," she said. "You're grieving. We know it's been hard since she passed." Her voice dipped on the mention of my late wife in a way that made me want to wash the word out of the air. "Let us handle the complicated parts. You can enjoy the family, the grandchildren." "You don't have grandchildren," I said, "and if you did, I would teach them what a boundary is." We stood there in the narrow hallway, my father's watch ticking audibly on my wrist, making time into a witness. Outside, a car rolled by, bass thumping. Somewhere a dog barked, and then, as if the neighborhood itself couldn't look away, quiet returned. The front window held Miss Doyle's silhouette like a shadow puppet, chin tilted, deciding whether to involve her phone. 10 seconds later, a bright rectangle glowed in her hand. Bless her nosy soul. The big man lifted the affidavit again. "Sir, one signature. Then we're gone." "Gone," I said, "like the box from under my bed." His eyes flicked to the bride. That was his mistake. Silence can scream. We didn't get to finish our dance. Knuckles rapped on the open door frame, 3 clipped knocks, and 2 officers stepped in, hands careful, posture friendly by design. The younger one nodded to me. I recognized him, Officer Perez, who once coached Little League with me on Saturdays. The kind of man who knows when a voice is a threat and when it's just a man trying not to shake. "Evening," Perez said, though it was barely past noon. Old habits of courtesy. "We got a call about a disturbance. Everyone okay here?" The bride shifted into saintliness so fast I heard the gears. "Officer, thank goodness. He's confused. He thinks we're stealing from him." She widened her eyes. A practiced tremor entered her voice. "We're just trying to help. He made some concerning statements at the church." I took a breath that tasted of chalk. I've spent my life not giving the world an excuse to speak for me. "Officer Perez," I said evenly. "They came into my home without permission to pressure me into signing legal documents. Earlier, a secured box was taken from my house. I believe they're trying to cover financial fraud." The older officer glanced at the younger. "Do you have proof of the theft, sir?" "Not what you can carry out in a pocket," I said, "but I can show you a note left on my desk." I hesitated a beat, then chose the road that wasn't fear. "And I can show you documents indicating forgery. Multiple." Perez's gaze moved to my son. "Can you explain why you're here?" My son attempted earnestness. The effort looked like it hurt. "He asked us to come," he lied. He's not well." "You're holding an affidavit," Perez said mildly. "People don't typically welcome surprise competency evaluations." The big man lowered the paper a fraction. "Even a fraction can be a confession." "I'd like them to leave my house," I said, keeping my hands still at my sides. "If they have business, they can contact my attorney." It was a bluff. I didn't have one, not yet. But confidence has a sound lawyer's respect. The bride's eyes went cold. For a second, the saint showed her teeth. "This isn't over," she said, voice flat. "It is for today," Perez said. "Ma'am, sir, you're going to step outside." They didn't fight. The big man walked out first, scanning the street like memorizing faces. My son brushed past me, elbow grazing my arm like a petty theft of respect. At the door, he paused, choked by all the things he couldn't say and all the things he dared not. "You're ruining us," he whispered. I leaned close enough to see the tiny scar on his cheek from a childhood bicycle fall I'd bandaged myself. "I taught you to ride," I said quietly. "I did not teach you to steal." His eyes watered, then hardened, and he was gone. Perez lingered. "You want to file a report?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I will, and when I do, I'll bring you more than feelings." He nodded. "Get your ducks in a row, Mr. Harris, and keep your door locked." At the threshold, he paused. "If you need a referral for a lawyer, I know a straight one." When they were gone, the silence came back different, emptier, but with a space inside it for strategy. I locked the door. My hands were steady now. The humiliation had burned down to a coal. Coals are patient. On the living room floor, near where my son had fumbled with the newspaper, a glint caught the light. A small key lay half hidden under the edge of the rug, the metal stamped with a 4-digit number and the name of a storage company 2 towns over. My chest tightened. I picked it up with a cloth napkin and turned it in my fingers. Evidence likes to hide where it can watch you choose. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Unit 314. "Don't wait. The same stranger?" I typed back a question and got nothing but the gray delivered. Across the street, Miss Doyle gave me a thumbs up through the glass like I'd just won a petty victory at the market. I almost laughed. Humor, when it returns after a long exile, arrives in rags. I didn't go alone. I called Marjorie. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting with her keys in hand. "Tell me where," she said. "Storage company off Highway 7, I told her. Unit 314. She exhaled into a chuckle that had no joy in it. "You finally learned to check where rats nest?" We met in the parking lot of a gas station that sold coffee that tasted like penance. Marjorie was still the woman I remembered from hospital waiting rooms and church potlucks, sharp-eyed, big-hearted, armed with truths you didn't ask for. She wore a denim jacket and carried a tote bag heavy with manila folders. "I brought you something," she said, sliding into my passenger seat without waiting to be invited. She pulled a folder out and opened it to reveal photocopies, old PTA forms, holiday party sign-ups, checks signed by the bride when she was treasurer of some committee. "Handwriting," she said. "You'd be amazed what women keep in purses." "You kept these?" I asked, both grateful and a little afraid of her organized mercy. "I kept them because your wife once cried on my porch about a signature on a refinance that didn't look like yours," she said. Back then I thought it was grief making her see ghosts. Now I think she saw the first shadow. We drove in a silence that felt like we were both rehearsing the words we'd need if the world went sideways. The storage facility sat behind a discount furniture store, a grid of orange doors under a long corrugated roof. A man at a desk behind bulletproof glass checked our IDs like he was measuring whether we were the sort of people who came for old Christmas decorations or for evidence. "Unit 314, he said, sliding a clipboard under the window slot. I nodded. "Lucky number," he said. "End of the second row. Lights should be automatic when you roll the door up." The asphalt crunched under our shoes as we walked. It was late afternoon now, the sun laying long bars of light across the row. My hands didn't shake as I fitted the key and felt the cylinder give. Sounds get louder in moments like this, the far-off whine of a saw, the faint slap of a flag in the wind, Marjorie's breath steady beside me. I rolled the door up. A rectangle of darkness became a small room. The light popped on with a tired hum. Boxes from floor to shoulder height, neat as an accountant's conscience. Each was labeled in thick black marker. Vendors, contracts, receipts, weddings. That last word almost made me laugh again. Some people can't resist cataloging their own sins with a flourish. On the nearest shelf sat a single banker's box with my last name written across it and a date, last spring. Inside my chest, something old and protective rose, the same ferocity I'd felt when he was a baby and coughed too long in the night. Marjorie touched my sleeve. "Careful," she said. "Photograph first. Don't disturb order, if we need to take it to court." She didn't get to finish. A shadow detached itself from the deeper dark behind the stack and became a man stepping forward slow, hands open, expression courteous like a warning. The same denim jacket from the diner, the cap lower this time. "Evening, Mr. Harris," he said, voice a little amused, a little tired. "Careful what you touch. Pick the wrong box and the whole story caves in." Marjorie straightened like a general. "And who are you to be curating crimes?" He smiled with one side of his mouth. "The man who knows which thread to pull." I looked from him to the box with my name and then to the tidy rows of evidence humming under the fluorescent light. And for the first time in a long time, the word inevitable felt like a friend I could count on. "Then tell me," I said, stepping closer, "which thread starts the unraveling?" He pointed, not to my box, not to contracts, but to a smaller plastic bin on a top shelf, labeled in careful letters, "Notary, seals and logs." "Start there," he said, "and don't stop." The plastic bin was lighter than I expected, but the sound it made when I set it down on the concrete was heavy as judgment. Inside were stacks of notary logs, neat books with spines cracked from use, and a small leather pouch that jingled faintly when I lifted it. The stranger in the denim jacket nodded toward it, arms folded like a man who had been through this ritual before. "Check the seals," he said. "Forgery's one thing. Fraud with a state seal? That's prison time." I loosened the drawstring. Inside were notary stamps, official ones, dated, some expired, some current. My stomach turned as I held one up to the light. The initials weren't mine, but the signature beside it was meant to be. Marjorie leaned in close, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. She flipped open one of the ledgers and began tracing with her finger. "Look here," she said. "Entries from the last 2 years. Dozens of transactions, all under your name. Everyone witnessed by someone who doesn't exist." She pulled out her phone, snapped pictures, her fingers quick and steady. "Chain of custody," she murmured, as though reciting a prayer. The man in the jacket crouched down beside us. Your son's bride's uncle runs a print shop 2 counties over. He's been making fake stamps for years. They use your name because it's clean. Old teacher, no record, trusted by the community. Who would doubt you? My chest tightened. The trust I had spent a lifetime building. Each Sunday sermon attended, every PTA meeting chaired, every quiet gesture of reliability, had been turned into counterfeit currency by my own blood. They hadn't just stolen money. They had stolen my name, my history, the good faith I had carved into this town like initials in oak. I lifted my father's watch from my wrist and set it on the box for a moment. The ticking was loud, echoing in the storage unit like it was keeping time on my rage. We document everything, I said. Every page, every seal. And when the day comes, they'll read it all out loud. Marjorie grinned, fierce and maternal. Now you're speaking my language. The stranger stood. Careful who you trust with this. Cops might be sympathetic, but banks, courts, they'll circle wagons to protect their reputations. You'll need more than evidence. You'll need strategy. I looked at him. Why help me? His mouth tilted in something between a smile and a grimace. Because your son made me an enemy before he made you a victim. And enemies, unlike sons, don't pretend to love you before stabbing you. He tipped his cap. That's all you get from me tonight. Then he slipped away into the twilight outside the storage unit, leaving me with the smell of dust, paper, and the sharp tang of betrayal cataloged in black marker. We spent hours photographing, page after page, box after box. My hands cramped from holding the phone steady, but I didn't stop. Every click of the camera was a nail in the coffin of their lies. When we finished, the sun was bleeding out across the horizon, painting the sky with bruises. Marjorie slid her phone into her bag, eyes fierce. You have enough to bury them, she said. The question is, how do you want to bury them? Quiet, in court, where it will drag on for years? Or loud, in front of everyone who ever shook your hand? Her words curled into my ear and stayed there as we drove back. Quiet justice would be safer. Yes, but safety was not what I wanted anymore. They had humiliated me at a wedding, stolen from me in my own home, treated my dignity as disposable. I wanted truth to echo, to shatter, to spread like wildfire across every porch and pew in this town. When I got home, I locked the new evidence in a hidden compartment under the stairs, one my wife used to keep Christmas presents in when the kids were little. I stood there in the silence of my house, touching the wooden frame, remembering her laughter. She saw the first shadow, Marjorie had said. My chest ached with the thought that my wife had carried suspicion to her grave, unable to prove what she knew. Now her silence had become my battle cry. That night, I didn't drink, didn't pace, didn't collapse. I sat at the kitchen table, laid out a legal pad, and began writing. Names, dates, amounts. Every memory of odd remarks, missing papers, sudden expenses my son couldn't explain. The pattern became a map, and the map showed not a careless boy, but a deliberate machine. My pen scratched across the page until the ink ran low. Then I sharpened a pencil and kept going. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps outside. I killed the lamp, moved to the window. A figure lingered near the porch, half hidden in the shrubs. I recognized the outline. My son. He stood there for a long time, not knocking, not calling, just watching. Then he turned and walked into the dark. I stayed at the window until dawn painted the street in pale light. The next morning, I walked into town with my notes in a folder under my arm. People stared, some with pity, some with curiosity. At the post office, Mrs. Doyle grabbed my hand. Don't let them shame you, she whispered. We all saw enough to know who you are. Her words steadied me more than she knew. Shame is contagious, but so is respect. I bought a burner phone at the corner store, tucked it into my pocket, and used it to call the county courthouse. I asked about procedures for filing fraud claims. The clerk on the other end sounded bored until I mentioned forged notary seals. Then her voice sharpened like a blade. Bring what you have, she said, and bring copies. By noon, I had scanned the first batch at the library, the old machine coughing and whirring as though reluctant to carry such weight. I fed page after page through, the glass smudged with fingerprints of forgotten essays and resumes. Each copy I slid into a second folder. Redundancy is survival. When I stepped outside, the sun hit me hard. Across the street, parked at an angle too deliberate, was my son's car. He sat behind the wheel, staring at me, his face pale and drawn. The bride was in the passenger seat, sunglasses hiding her eyes. When she saw the folder under my arm, her lips tightened. They didn't move, didn't call out, didn't wave. They just watched as I crossed the street, my shoes tapping like gavel knocks. I stopped in front of the car, leaned slightly toward the open window. "This ends soon," I said quietly. "Not the way you planned." My son's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight the leather groaned. "Dad, you'll regret this." "I regret only that it took me this long to stop you." The bride finally spoke, her voice smooth as glass. "You don't understand what you're walking into." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "And you don't understand what it feels like when a man who's been called worthless decides to show his value." I walked on, leaving them sitting in the heat of their own panic. That evening, Marjorie came by with groceries, 2 loaves of bread, a jar of honey, and her sharp tongue. "Eat," she said, setting them on my counter. "Strategy runs better on full stomachs." She sat across from me, sipping tea, her eyes scanning my notes. "You've got the makings of a case, but you also have the makings of a reckoning." Her words lodged deep. A case was for courts, a reckoning was for people, and people needed to see. The idea began to bloom in me, dangerous, luminous, irresistible. I didn't sleep that night either. I drafted a speech, short and sharp. I made copies of the documents, and I thought of a place where the town gathered, where no one could pretend not to hear, the church. The same altar where they had tried to erase me, the same aisle where my son had spat worthless, the same community that needed to know what had been done under their noses. Sunday was only 2 days away. As dawn came, I folded the papers into a leather briefcase, polished my shoes again, and pressed my blazer. This time, when I looked in the mirror, I saw not a broken man but a witness sharpening himself into a blade. But just as I zipped the case, my phone rang. Not the burner, my own phone. The caller ID was blocked. I hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice, low and urgent. "Don't take it to the church. If you speak there, you won't walk out." The line went dead. The warning echoed in my head through the long hours of Saturday. If you speak there, you won't walk out. Threats are strange things, they chill your blood, but they also prove your enemy is afraid. I spent the day pacing the house, the briefcase always within reach, rehearsing sentences in my mind. Each line was a nail, each fact a hammer. By evening, I had decided, fear was a prison I had already lived in too long. Tomorrow, I would speak. Sunday morning, the air was cool and sharp. I polished my shoes until they shone like mirrors and slipped into my navy blazer. The briefcase felt heavy, but not with paper, with justice. As I walked to the church, neighbors whispered. Some nodded encouragement. Some looked away. Shame had been public, and now truth would be too. The church bell tolled, calling the town to gather. Inside, the pews were full. Familiar faces turned as I entered, curious, cautious, expectant. At the front, the priest caught my eye, his expression unreadable. My son and his bride sat near the altar, dressed too finely for ordinary Sunday, their posture stiff as glass. "I won't take long," I said, my voice carrying more strongly than I expected. 2 days ago, at this very altar, I was called worthless. I was humiliated in front of my family and my God. But today, I stand with proof that the real worthlessness lies not in me, but in lies, in theft, in betrayal. I lifted the first document. Gasps rippled through the pews as I held it high. This is a deed to land my father left me. It bears my name, but not my signature, she whispered in his ear. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. I took my seat in the middle pew. The sermon began, words of forgiveness and community, but they rolled over me like water on stone. My mind beat with one word: truth. When the final hymn ended and the congregation began to shift, I stood. The movement silenced the room faster than any bell. My briefcase clicked open, the sound sharp in the hush. It was forged. I laid it on the altar. This is a loan taken in my name, my supposed consent, notarized by a ghost. Another forgery. More gasps, murmurs. I laid it down, page after page, each one a blade, each one proof. They called me worthless while they stole from me, from this community, from the trust we built together. My son leapt to his feet. Lies, he shouted, his voice breaking. He's sick. He's delusional. But his eyes betrayed him, wide and frantic, darting to the bride. She rose slowly, her mask of calm still in place. These accusations are baseless, she said smoothly. We are the victims of a bitter old man. I reached into the briefcase one last time and lifted the notary logs. Baseless, I said, my voice like iron. These are official records, and they don't just show my name forged. They show dozens of false entries. This isn't just theft, it's organized fraud. I turned to the priest, who stood pale and rigid. Father, you opened my first envelope. Open this truth now, before the eyes of all. I handed him the log. His hands shook as he scanned the page. The silence of the church deepened, every breath a witness. Finally, his voice rang out. These signatures are false. These seals are false. What has been done here is not only a sin, but a crime. The congregation erupted. Shouts, gasps, the scrape of pews as people stood. Some stared at me with awe, others at my son with betrayal. A woman near the front sobbed. The bride's mask cracked, her lips pressed tight, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. My son's face crumpled, then hardened into rage. You ruined me, he shouted. Your pride, your rules, your so-called dignity, you made me nothing. I took what I deserved. The words hung in the air like poison. The bride hissed at him, furious at the slip. But it was too late. The room had heard. Neighbors, friends, the very people he had grown up with. The truth was no longer mine alone. From the back, Officer Perez stepped forward, hand on his belt. His eyes swept the altar, the documents, the faces. We'll be needing all of this, he said quietly but firmly. And the two of you, he added, nodding at my son and his bride, will need to come with us. Panic flickered across their faces. My son tried to bolt, but two deacons moved faster than I expected, blocking the aisle. The bride didn't run. She just stood there, eyes locked on me with a hatred so pure it almost burned. As the officers led them out, the church buzzed like a hive split open. Whispers, stares, tears. My humiliation had been public, but so was my vindication. When the doors closed behind them, I stood alone at the altar, the documents spread like wounds made visible. My knees trembled, not from weakness, but from release. I looked out at the congregation, at the faces that had once looked at me with pity. Now they looked with something else. Respect, maybe even awe. I never wanted this, I said softly. I only wanted to be a father, to give my children a name worth carrying. But when your own blood calls you worthless and you have two choices, believe it or prove them wrong. Today, I proved them wrong. Silence, then a ripple of applause that grew until the church shook with it. Hands clapping, voices crying out, people standing. I closed my eyes, let the sound wash over me, not as pride, but as cleansing. Years of quiet endurance, of being overlooked, of swallowing insult. They broke apart under that storm of affirmation. After the service, people crowded me. Mrs. Doyle hugged me tight. The old union men clapped my back. Strangers pressed my hands, murmuring thanks, apologies, blessings. But the moment that undid me was when a small boy tugged my sleeve. "Mister," he said shyly, "you're not worthless. You're the bravest man I ever saw." His mother pulled him away, embarrassed, but I knelt for a second, touched his shoulder and whispered, "Don't ever let anyone steal your name." That night, my house was quiet, but no longer heavy. The documents were with the police now. My son and his bride would face justice. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the same table where my wife once laughed, where my children once spread homework. For the first time in years, the silence felt like peace. I thought about the word that had started it all, worthless, how quickly it had been thrown, how deeply it had cut. But words are strange. They wound, yes, but they also reveal. By calling me worthless, my son had shown his own worthlessness. By standing, by fighting, by refusing silence, I had reclaimed mine. I looked at my father's watch ticking steadily on my wrist. Time had carried me through humiliation, through betrayal, through fire, and time had delivered me to this moment, not broken, not erased, but whole. I sipped my coffee and smiled to the empty room. "Worthless," I whispered. "Say it again. I dare you." "And you, would you have the courage to confront your own family for justice?"